Welcome to TAO-Living, the Art of Living podcast with your host, Corleto, where you will be supported to remember that you are the driver and not the vehicle, so that you can walk your life in trust. Welcome back to this episode of the TAO-Living podcast, the Art of Living. And today I'm extremely blessed to have my guest speaker with me, who I first met, she's back in the late 80s. She and her husband, I was a student in chiropractic college, and I saw them speak, and I'm like, whoa, these people, they're on to something I don't know about yet, and I need to know what it is. Jane has been teaching internationally for decades around healing and consciousness. That's her mission in life, is to grow her own consciousness and share the wisdom with others. She's traveled to 43 different countries. She spends half of the year in Colorado, half of the year in Mexico. Just a wealth of wisdom. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Jane Burnier. Thank you. Today's topic, in at least this culture, the Western culture, is pretty taboo for a lot of people. It's one of the reasons that I asked Jane on to have this conversation and unpack her wisdom. And that is around death and dying, and more specifically, conscious dying. I know the way that I grew up, which was this complete a fear of death and disconnect from the whole process. And so it was just, be afraid. And then all the other connotations, like, did I do the right thing when I die? Am I going to go this way or that way? Right. All that stuff. And then as a kid, right, the only time I saw it was in a corpse in a box. And then that was it. And then nobody spoke about it and we went on, right? So it was just this whole mystery kind of thing. And I'm sharing that with the audience from maybe you're still there, maybe you're not. But Jane and I are going to unpack some different concepts. We spoke live. Before we went live, we were sharing different stories and experiences. I was laughing, I was crying, right? And you might do the same. So thanks for being here on the call. Jane, how did you first get called into the process of serving people during the transition or assisting in conscious dying?
It's interesting. My husband Arnaud and I lived in New Hope, Pennsylvania in the 80s, and towards New Hope is a city between Philadelphia and New York, and it had a very large male gay population, maybe 50% to 60% of the population. And so when the AIDS outbreak came, if people remember the beginning of that, people were terrified. And I mean, partners wouldn't touch their own partners. A mother wouldn't touch her own son. There was so much fear in the media about contamination and all of this. And I was a Reiki practitioner, a massage practitioner. I had already been at a few deaths, and I was like, these people are not going to die alone on my watch. And so I started interacting and having people come and lay on my massage table. And if they had sores, I just put a little tissue over it and I did Reiki on it. And if it was appropriate, just soothe them and massage their feet, whatever they needed to just feel love. And in that process, I started to wake up to the fact that as we got closer to their moment of release into the cosmic oneness, their ego dropped, persona dropped. They started to be just this light and love and essence. And with the support of myself and Arnaud, feeling safe and loved, this beauty came out of these men. And I was like, my God, their families are missing this beautiful shift. And I realized at that time that our consciousness evolves to the last breath. And it's such a gift. So all of these men were conscious because at that time, it was right at the beginning. So there were no drugs available. And so I had the opportunity to oftentimes have my hand right on their heart, or holding their hands or holding their feet. And they just expired in this total bubble of love and acceptance and free of ego and free of concern. And it just evolved my consciousness and allowed me to let go of any fear of what this process would be all about. At that time, I was, just in my mid 40s probably, and now I'm 74. So it's been a journey of then wanting to be with people during their transition because I saw the beauty of allowing people to become their true self. You know, Gandhi said, let your life be your message. And I also feel that one's death very much can be their message and their gift. Because when someone makes this transition without denial, with total acceptance, with peace in their heart, it not only affects their family and everyone around them, but it's placing a footprint in the matrix of universal consciousness. Just like we brought birth more and more into a home or non-interference, we can bring death back home and a lack of interference, a lack of denial, not all hooked up to tubes and incoherent and everyone saying, oh, you'll be fine, when all the person wants is authentic truth and peace.
Thank you for sharing that for the audience so they get a gist of how you were called into this process. And what I'd like to do is unpack some of your evolving experience, right? For all of us. Uh-oh, did I freeze?
Yeah, you're frozen. Oh, there you go.
There we go. For all of us to ride the wave of your wisdom in this as we go in the conversation, especially for those folks who are listening who might still have the cultural stuff, or the fear, right? The fear around death, everything from like what happens next, right? It all ends, to the great mystery, right? And I'm thinking about not only my own journey, but also the journey of the transition for the way that I grew up and the thoughts that I was given around death, to the place that I have been living for decades now in this beautiful continuum, right? I often draw on a whiteboard when I'm working with people is like physics, the sine, cosine, right? So that upward curve and the downward curve. And then, if I draw a line right between those curves, the entrance of the upper curve is birth, right? And there's this loop, and then the downward continuum is what we call death. But it's just the passage to the next flow, right? Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It just changes forms, right? So how did this, when you began serving these beautiful souls, these men, and it shifted your awareness about this gift, this time of transition, what were the pieces that either you needed to unpack and shift into your awareness, that you own now? Does that question make sense or no?
Yes. So I think the biggest thing is in every death that I have been involved in, and, let's call it about 15, there's a moment, and sometimes it's 5 minutes before the last breath, sometimes it's weeks before the last breath, but that the ego and the persona completely drops away. And that is the sweet spot for people assisting in the death and the person dying. It's when their pure essence, for maybe the first time in their life, is shining through. And what's so curious to me about that is that, for centuries, this was happening and people were noticing this and having this experience, I'm sure. And then when medicine became the prominent way to deal with things, they turned that beautiful experience into a failure. If somebody dies, I have failed. I might even be sued. I have to deny this. This is the worst thing that could have ever happened. And it changed culturally then in all of these Western cultures. It became something to avoid, to fear, and you're too weak to even be around it. Leave this to the professionals, all of that. And it's a profound change. And I think one of the differences, have spent the last 45 to 50 years in the chiropractic philosophy, which has a philosophy of life, where medicine is devoid of philosophy. So in chiropractic, we believe that there is this universal wisdom, universal intelligence. And we talk in chiropractic a lot about that during the birth process. But I think we've dropped the ball somewhat on the death process, because even in chiropractic, it's still somewhat taboo to openly accept this as a vital part of life and a way to evolve consciousness. And what I describe as conscious death is when you know you're dying and you're going to use this experience to still serve, to still grow, to still evolve, and to still move forward with your consciousness. It is your final contribution to the planet to bring something beautiful to the matrix and the stream of collective consciousness.
So right there, that's a massive shift for all of us, right? What you just that nugget you just shifted, which is the cultural piece of, well, I'm dying, which means I'm gonna be dead, right? All these final concepts, and then it's over. Versus what you're sharing is there's a continuum and a continuation, and therefore, as I keep in this sacred moment, continue to grow and evolve, how that serves not only the soul, but the field.
Yes, and the other
What a
part that
different
I want
paradigm.
to discuss about that, in many of these deaths, and certainly in my husband Arnaud's death, some of your viewers probably would have known, if he went down the medical road, which wasn't really even a consideration, but they would have wanted these 3 different surgeries, he would have become really an experimental slab of meat. And both of us realized that that experience, even if it gave him another, 3, 6, 9 months of being on this planet, the cost to his consciousness, the cost to his soul would have been so great. So we both wanted him to exit in light, in bliss, in joy, in trust, so that if he chose to reincarnate, he wouldn't have to work through all of that ending of a soul journey that would have not been congruent with his philosophy. He would have betrayed himself if he went down another road. So to choose to be in total and complete integrity with your philosophy to your last breath is just such an act of courage and on some level, defiance. Those who know Arnaud knew he could hold the line, and he did. And I often said to him, if we die the way we live, you will die fairly quickly, because he did everything kind of quickly and everything intensely. And he did die in a fast and intense way, but with total consciousness. And the day of his death, the right side of his body just started to shimmer and almost break down into light. He became all spirit.
Mm. Mm. And so, ladies and gentlemen that are listening, what I'd ask you to reflect on is the picture Jane just painted versus what happens way too often, where people are surrounded in fear while they're making their transition or dying, or plugged up because they might have some kind of quote unquote condition. So they might have tubes and monitors. And that's not a state of trust and peace. And one of the pieces for sure is the environment, right? Those moments, I've witnessed a lot of people that are dying. They stay longer than they need to because of the people around them, right? A lot of guilt. Please don't go. It's not time yet. I'm not ready, right? The people that are still living, I'm not ready yet, and making it all about them. And the person that's dying is going, shit, I really want to go, but okay, great. I'll hang out for a little longer. When my dad was making his transition, the big thing that I sat with him was like, hey, I'm one of 9 kids. And he was married for over 50 years. And I was just reminding him, like, your wife is good, right? There's 9 kids and 25 grandkids, right? She's good. We got her covered. And you did a great job raising us. Let go home. Because he could have dragged this out and suffered for a lot longer. And just instilling that awareness and permission, because it was new for him from the way he grew up. But he embraced it. And then within 2 days, we held him in his bed while he took his last breath, and and the space you described, 100% just, whew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that set and setting, right? Talking to listening audiences, even in stepping away from the dying process for a moment, when somebody's going through any kind of healing process that's intense, that might, because of your choices to trust in the healing process, the last thing you want is people around you who aren't on board, right? Oh my God, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. So they're interjecting their fear, and that's not good for you, the one going through the process. So protecting that space is critical, right? In any dynamic, and especially in the dying process.
You brought up such an important point. It is so important for all of us to really put ourselves and our ego and our whatever religious belief systems or our needs aside and tune in to the dying person. And exactly what you described, I was with a man named Danny Moon, and his wife and children were in the other room, a lot of drama, a lot of crying, a lot of screaming. And I just put my hands on his heart and I said, Danny, you have been a beautiful man, lived a beautiful life. We have it, just like you said to your dad, it's okay. You can let go now and go into the light. And one tear just dripped out down his cheek, and his heart just stopped under my hands. And I just sat there with him quietly for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then just tiptoed into the other room and said, Danny is gone. And then we stayed overnight, laid on the floor near his body so that his spirit had a chance to go. When the undertakers were called the next day, they weren't that happy because he had gotten stiff. But that happened 2 more times. So then it was in the same time. Then they would come and go, oh, it's you slept with the body. But you need to just allow time for to know that the spirit has totally gone on, and now we are only dealing with the physical matter that's left.
Mm.
And so if at any time you're going to put yourself aside and really be there for someone else, it's to honor their dying process and not keep holding on, because they will always be with you. You know, I want to share, before Arnaud died, I asked him for a sign. How will I know you're around? And there's a lot of things that I thought he might have said, because he loved, you know, hummingbirds and dragonflies and ravens, but he said the number 11. And he has come back as 11 so many times and to so many people around the world. And your loved ones are right there. They really are. And we can continue to interact. And I think the veil between the worlds is thinning more and more. And the more we tune into it and get out of our fear and come into peace, the easier our own transition will be. And the more that we can pave the way for this consciousness of, it's not a dirt nap, believe me, it's truly a transition.
So the ladies and gentlemen, the thinking about children, right? If you watch kids that are allowed to be kids, and they're having these communications with these so-called, you know, their imaginary friends. Again, it's the adult concept that it's the imaginary friends because the adults can't see what the kids are speaking to, right? Whatever you want to call them, angels, guides, forms, you know, whatever that is. Yet they're in complete communication until they stay on the planet longer and talk themselves out of it and they can't see anymore. Well, just because you've been taught that, like even the terminology, right? I lost my mom. You know, my mind goes, where, in the park? But so conscious languaging, we've been given words to communicate this process that keeps creating separation and pain versus consistency, inclusion. Yes, they're not in the physical form where you can physically hold their hand, but you can still hug them and you can still walk with them and you can still talk with them, right? And again, that's not to inject my belief into you. I'm sharing that as a possibility. If you're willing to open up into that possibility and investigate that process yourself. Something Jane said earlier too, that is, well, I'll just go there, right? The medical industrial complex. So the one version of the physician, and I see my screen's frozen. The one version of the physician is, you know, the ego of, I can save you and keeping people here, right? That's that personal part of the individual physician. But for me, the medical industrial complex that actually keeps people longer, and quite frankly, it's greed. It's not for the service of the person, right? My mom was a director of nurses, and she used to run a huge nursing facility when she left the hospitals for many decades. And I remember as a kid walking in and seeing, you know, folks that I'm like, whoa, my gosh, you know, you died a long time ago. Why are you still here? And that place of our culture, right? We're going to keep people here as long as we can. And
let's face it, there's some insurance things going on. I had a sister who died several years ago, and she had a do not resuscitate and all of this, but she had fabulous insurance. She was in the University of Pennsylvania, which is a teaching hospital, and they eventually incubated her because they said, oh, it was 3 a.m. We couldn't get a hold of the family. If that had been me and all I have is Medicare, they would have said, go home, you have maybe 2 weeks to live, put your affairs in order. And if they had done that, service to her, everything would have changed. But because of the way it played out in such a gruesome way that was dishonoring to her and her soul and her process and nothing she would have wanted, She didn't get to close with people. Her estate was in a mess. Her will wasn't signed. It's just not okay.
Yeah, when I was a kid, my grandmother, so as I mentioned, my mom, and was the thinking of my immediate family. My grandmother started having challenges emotionally, mentally, whatnot, and so they put her in a nursing facility. Well, as soon as they did, she's like, "I'm out." So she quit eating. So
Yeah.
they came in and started force feeding her. And she kept pulling the tube out and blah blah blah. And because she chose not to eat and just laid in the bed because she wasn't moving, she ended up developing some issues in her foot, circulation issues. And she was in her late 80s, and they cut her foot off. And then a couple of days later, she died. Right. And I'm just a young kid, so I didn't have the awareness yet. But I'm like, what are you doing? Like, how could you do that to somebody? Just leave them alone. I had the innate awareness of going,
Yeah.
it's just time to go home. Let them be. Like, what's with the torture? And so, yeah, the just now, like the old Jimi Hendrix song popped in my head. You know, I have to die when it's my time to die. So let me live the way I want to, right?
Yeah.
And I want to continue that with it's me that's dying when I die. So let me die the way I want to. Like even in our culture, we can't die in certain ways. Like I literally years ago went and sat with an attorney to do a living will, like you talked about, and at the end, part of it was the whole death process. I'm like, well, here's what it is. I will first choice is I'll be put in a wooden boat like the Vikings, and I'm going to have all my friends at Life Celebration, like for the money's raised for charity, and they get $5 for an arrow, and whoever can light it on fire, right? And she's looking at me like, that's funny. How do you really? I'm like, I'm being serious.
I'm
That's
serious.
my
Yeah,
thing,
me
right?
too. I love
Yeah.
that.
And she's like, well, I can't sign that. I'm like, I'm not asking you your permission. I just need you to put a notary on there that's
Right.
my intention. And it turned into like this massive issue with the legal environment because that was my choice. I'm like, hold on, how are you telling me how I cannot die, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah.
I want to bring a little bit to like after Arnaud died, or my sister died, or my parents died, and I had people are uncomfortable themselves because for everyone it brings up their own mortality. So in this last process, what I found most helpful, in the first month after someone dies, especially a spouse or somebody very close, food is just like, you can't even think about it.
Mm,
So if you're wondering what to do with people, instead of making horrible casseroles that they're going to have to scrape into the garbage, just give them find out where they love to eat and give them some gift certificates so they can just Uber eat some food when they need it and the
mm,
amount they need it. So there's not a lot of waste. And if they don't use it for 3 weeks, it's still there. That's one thing. And instead of a lot of flowers that die, and then you have to get rid of these dead flowers, which is really heartbreaking. Um, an orchid is nice because it can last for a long time, or chocolate or something like that. And I wouldn't have realized it before this, but actually a card in the mail, a handwritten card expressing your condolences is actually quite helpful.
mm,
So I really got in touch more with how can I be better when this happens to
mm,
somebody else? Because our knee jerk is to make some noodle dish or, send some daisies, and none of that really actually
mm,
works.
mm,
So anyway, that's that. But I want to tell you about a death of a woman. She came to our office when she was already pretty deeply in this dying process. And she was horribly afraid of dying. And we were able to get her into a hospice Quaker center. And I would go see her every day. And she was like, I can't do it. So what I did is I started making her date tea because she couldn't eat and she's on hospice, so they're not going to hook her up, but you just boil dates and it's so nutritious. And every day I would bring her date tea and she would come and sip like 3 cups of this tea a day. And what happened was it gave her probably a week to 10 more days. And in that time, with me sitting with her and counseling her and looking at her fears, she finally just came into total peace and acceptance of her death. And then she died very, very peacefully. So still no denial, no interference, no tubes, just date tea, which literally can keep you alive for quite a long time, and gave her that opportunity to meet up with her soul and she started to be able to walk between the worlds and accept the process and see
What a gift.
the beauty of where she was going.
What a gift.
Mhm.
On the flip side, so thank you for those beautiful practical suggestions about how we can show up for people who are in the process of being with the transition of their loved one. So thank you for that. And on the side for the individual, just a thought to share that something for me, which is whenever anybody, but especially those dear to me, make their transition, there's a lot of things that I go through for me, but also for the extended family. But one of the things I choose to use for me is time's up, right? Am I living full out? Am I utilizing every day that I have, because I don't know when the last one is, to its full capacity to love, experience life instead of being guarded or blah, blah, blah. And like Jane said, the beautiful place is when the persona and the ego drop, the real essence gets to show, right? Hence this podcast, the TAO-Living, the art of living. When you remember that you're the driver, right, the spirit, and not the body, you can walk your life in trust.
Yes.
And so that's something that I personally choose to do, if that serves, is just take that as a reminder of, hey, what a life you lived, bravo. Now I get to reflect it. What can I do to step up and be a better presence of goodness while I'm putting footprints on this planet? Anyways, just that came through. Thought I'd share it.
Yeah. I want to share a little magic. Arnaud said he would come back as the number 11. And I've had several memorials for him, but I had one just 3 days ago on January 11th at 11, just for my neighborhood here in Mexico. And there's a young man who is, I think he was 43, who came to Arnaud. Arnaud served him chiropractic care, he and his wife. And right before Arnaud was making his transition, this young man found out he had a very invasive brain tumor. And they told him, you would have 18 months to live if you do chemo and radiation, about 6 months to live if you do nothing. And because of sitting with Arnaud in Arnaud's final days, he decided, I want to have 6 months of quality rather than 18 months of suffering. And of course, we supported him in that, and so did his wife. But he has a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so about 10 days ago, I had a long conversation with him, and he had a brain cancer, so he was going in and out, but he was pretty clear in those moments. And I said, I promise you, from the bottom of my heart, Arnaud will be there to receive you into his arms. And I just found out this morning that he died on 1/11 a few days ago. At 11, at the same time I was having the memorial for Arnaud. And in the memorial for Arnaud, there's a picture of he and his wife and Arnaud and I, because Arnaud married this young couple. And so the perfection of the universe, and to be able to tell his wife, she didn't know that I had promised him that Arnaud would be there. She didn't know I had a memorial at 111 at 11. So it was so soothing to her to realize, oh my God, Arnaud was there for him, and that there is consciousness and wisdom in every molecule, every particle of air. Everything is working towards our growth and evolution, and every particle is filled with light and love.
So, Jane, if you were going to help somebody transition into the place of from fear to trust during this process, right? I think that's the culminating piece. It's like, oh, I hear what you're saying. That sounds nice, but I'm still over here, right? Because of the stories that I have, or the experiences, or the beliefs, or the perspectives, not knowing what could be. So how do you support somebody to start making that transition from the stories and the fear and the cultural beliefs into embracing trust and expansion and freedom? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
It does. It seems to be somewhat of an organic process for people, but certainly with the people who I sat with, and especially the younger men who had AIDS, I was just sitting and laughing and talking about what are the most magical moments of your life, just that review and getting people to access their joy and what they contributed, and what's the best thing that you could imagine that there could be available on the other side of this veil. And in nowadays, I mean, there's so many, there weren't then, but there's so many near-death experience videos on YouTube. And if you just look at it, it's so consistent. How can thousands of people be seeing and experiencing, and nobody really wants to come back. They come back because, they have a child or a mission that isn't complete, or some kind of a message. But I would also encourage people to read that book from Anita Mayorgi, Dying to Be Me, which so clear that everything she saw and experienced. And once people can just really talk about that, and what really is the fear, and just allowing that to be, because right now there isn't even spaciousness for that. So work through it. Tell me, what's the worst thing that you think that could happen, and what's the best? And then let's watch some of these near-death experiences, or let me read some of these passages from books where people were there and came back, and that consciousness is obviously, there's no endpoint, even if it's bringing up quantum physics. I mean, this is proven now. Quantum physics has been around since the 1940s. So close to 100 years, they're still teaching Newtonian physics in school. It's absolutely absurd that they won't allow these beautiful concepts that would be so comforting to people to be mainstream. You really have to look into it. But I think a lot of time the dying are afraid of leaving people behind and what they're going to have to deal with. So if you're assisting someone, to really keep assuring them, yes, it will be difficult. I will miss you, but I will be okay. And I can handle this. I had to say that to Arnaud so many times. I'm okay, sweetheart. You can let go in peace. I'll get the support. I have what I need. and I'll see you in the not too distant future. And I am absolutely 100% sure that we're soulmates and we will connect on, and that there's just nothing to be afraid of, really. Even pain, because with hospice, they're angels, and I just so highly recommend their service, because once you're in hospice, you have no fear of being resuscitated into a vegetative state. You have no fear of being force-fed or having an IV. They just won't do anything except palliative care, which means if you need morphine in a dropper or you need painkillers or a sleep medication, they will give you that, but they won't in any way interfere with your eating, with you drinking, with anything else. And you're just there with your loved ones, supporting you, they're supporting, and they're angels. And that's the way to go.
Beautiful.
Be at home, be comfortable, and have that peace that no one will do any heroic things to prolong the process of your consciousness joining with the one consciousness. Mhm.
You mentioned before we went live that there was something you would like to read before we close.
Yes. So Arnaud, some of you will know him. He wrote this book. It's called The Cafe of Life and the Mosquito Principle. The mosquito principle meaning if you think you're too small to make a difference, spend a night with a mosquito in your room. But I want to read a very short passage that he wrote 18 months before he died. And it's so, and Arnaud was incredibly vital and active. And if I took a picture the day before his knee blew out, that with complications ultimately led to his death. But had you told me at that time that 5 months later Arnaud would be gone, there's no way I could believe that. He was a very vital man. But this is what he wrote. As people approach death, they slowly, progressively enter the divine consciousness. Their energy begins to glow. Their inner spirit shines through. The physical vessel has become so frail, there is not much physical matter left. The veil between physical and spiritual becomes thinner. The spirit radiates outward and expands, while the body recedes and shrinks. This is a very precious time for both the dying and the living, especially for close relatives. It is a time when the dying often express silently or by words or gestures total compassion, acceptance, understanding, wisdom, love, forgiveness, vulnerability, surrender, and sometimes fear. And that is exactly what happened. And it's so fascinating that months and months before his actual transition, when he was still vital, I could tell something in his subconscious was aware. He was getting everything prepared in our life, sold his motorcycles, we downsized out of our house. He just made everything succinct and practical for my life moving forward. And then toward the end, when he really realized he was in that process, did everything he could to make it as easy as possible. But long before there was any indication, the subconscious mind knew. And as I reflected deeply after his death, and for many, many years, I've reflected on this, that every day, there's 365 days in the year. One of those days has the date and time of each of our deaths, and it passes every year. And July 21st at 7:21 passed by 72 times. And neither Arnaud nor myself or his parents, when they were alive, realized that would be the moment of his death. And the moment of my death is passing by every year, and I'm unaware. And it's as sacred and profound and is written in the stars as the moment of your birth. And it doesn't matter if it's an accident or however it happens, it's still the exact correct moment for your soul's transition. So to trust that, to trust that innate wisdom and intelligence is not only present at your birth, but is present for your soul at the end of your life and the continuation of your energy field into the great oneness. That's what can end the fear, is that, yes, there is something greater running this show, and it continues through our death process and beyond. There is no beginning, there is no end.
Aho,
This is.
aho,
Aho.
aho. Thank you, Jane. That was exquisite. I was, as you were sharing this, so years ago, I read this book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and it was a hospice nurse, right? I'm sure you've read that. So for the listening audience, and so she's serving these beautiful souls as they're making transitions, yet in the conversation, she kept hearing regrets. And that happens a lot with people when they're about to transition. They're reflecting on their life, like what I haven't done versus what I have, right? And so hence the book, The Top 5 Regrets. Yet they were in priority because of the way they showed up in the sense of frequency. And the number one was, I wished I would have lived a life true to myself, not one that others expected of me. And so I believe that's popping back into my awareness right now as we come to close on the call, is just as a reminder for all of us. If we're living full out, when it is time, as Jane talked about, for that moment to transition, it's a heck of a lot easier to embrace the next step without any of the, oh no, I should have, could have, would have, blah, 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 versus I gave it my best, right? And so just that invitation, right? We've been talking about conscious dying. How about some conscious living, right?
Yes.
Which then makes the conscious dying so much easier.
So much easier.
So we don't have all the stuff in there. So that, that's that invitation of step into it, people, right? Step into it. And so Jane, any last closing thoughts on anything you would like to share with the listening audience? Anyway.
Well, just to tap in another moment to the regret part. I think every day, if we just more and more let it be, see the perfection, let go of our little things have to be a certain way, building trust every day of your life of it's perfect. Whatever's happening, we can't always see what is going on. I mean, these fires in LA are heartbreaking, and at the same time, they're happening. There's some type of perfection, and I know that would be hard for somebody to hear right now. But if you can trust life, you can trust death and that process. And there is something so far greater running the show. And actually, I'm pretty excited about whenever that moment shows up for me and seeing the totality of what it all meant and the whole tapestry and fabric of my life and life on this planet. And It's an exciting journey, and embrace life and live it consciously. And when your moment comes, embrace death and live it consciously. And love, love, love really is the answer.
Speak the words that further the silence. Jane, thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the TAO-Living Podcast. And if this resonated with you at all, please share it, because this is a topic that isn't really being addressed, and especially in the Western culture. So, food for thought. And, live full out. Until next time, abundant blessings. Ciao.
Ciao. Love, love, love. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the TAO-Living Podcast, The Art of Living. Now go to loucorleto.com, LOUCORLETO.com, to receive your free training, the operator's manual for your vehicle. See, when you buy a phone, you get a manual. When you buy a car, you get a manual. When you entered your body, no manual. Let me teach you how it's really designed to work. Also, help me help others and share this podcast far and wide. And subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, abundant blessings.